I was just about to say we are recording this and realized I didn't turn on the recording. So now we are recording this workshop so that we can capture your comments and allow everybody the opportunity to go back and listen because we plan on putting the recording in the workshop docket. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping matters to share with people. It would be very helpful if you would identify yourself when you speak, since we're in this virtual environment and several of the people are call-in users. It's not necessarily easy to see who is speaking. Please mute your microphones when you are not speaking. That we tend to get a lot of feedback and noise, especially in the virtual environment. Depending on how you are connected, you may need to unmute your phone and also your computer when you would like to speak. So if you're trying to answer a question and it doesn't seem like we hear you, it could be because you need to do the double unmute. We ask that for those of you that can, use the raise your hand function in WebEx to kind of help control who's speaking, and we'll call on you. Obviously, the people on the phone may not be able to do that, and feel free to jump in as you need to. We've also found that it helps with bandwidth and feedback issues if you turn your camera off. So as soon as I finish here, I'll be turning my camera off and turning it over to Claire. At this point, are there any questions on kind of the process or what we're trying to accomplish today? Okay, hearing none. I know Commissioner Coleman is on the phone. I'm not sure if there are other commissioners. Commissioner Coleman or any other commissioner that may be on, do you have any comments that you'd like to make before we get started?
None for me. Thank you, Natea.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not hearing any other commissioners either. Once again, we would look forward to your input today so that we can consider your thoughts and promptly move forward with a draft rule for the Commission's consideration. So at this time, I'll turn it over to Claire, and thank you for your thoughts.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the workshop here today. I'm Claire Eubanks, the Manager of Engineering Analysis, and staff had filed fairly recently this week several questions which we're going to go over today. The first topic for consideration is criteria to determine whether a legally enforceable obligation is established, or LEO. FERC Order 872A mentions several criteria which a state could consider to determine whether a LEO is established. These include taking meaningful steps to obtain site control, applying for approvals and permits, and filing an interconnection application. So the first question I'll pose to the group is, what types of information would satisfy taking meaningful steps to obtain site control? Feel free to use your raise your hand option or speak up if you're ready to go and a call-in user. I will call on you if no one speaks up. Paula, why don't you start us off? See, your hand is raised.
Thank you, Claire. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss this a little bit. I think that there are criteria we could add, but I do think that it wouldn't be an exclusive or all-inclusive list. I think there is the opportunity that, some things could come up that we would need to look at on a case-by-case basis. There are certainly things that might be helpful to have in order to bolster the case, but I don't think any one item can be, or any combination of items can be determinative, just because it's going to depend. But obviously things with regard to like site control, like property leases and leasing rights, the fact that they filed an interconnection application, although the interconnection application on its own, I do not think would be sufficient. proof of QF certification, but again, I don't think that by itself would be sufficient. Proof of insurance coverage is a possibility. If there's zoning requirements in the place where they're looking at developing, if there's any relevant DNR applications, or like if there's a wind farm, there might even be FAA requirements that need to be met. But I think kind of having a list of things so we can look and go case by case and go, okay, they obviously have put some effort into it. They've talked to landowners. They've secured these lease rights, that kind of thing. Those might be something that's indicative and helpful, but I would recommend the list not be exclusive, and that there be room for other considerations and some flexibility to determine what's appropriate.
Thank you, Paula. Does anyone else want to chime in at this point? That does lead us into the next question, which is what type of approvals and permits may reasonably be required in your service territory. I think Paula kind of touched on this a little bit. In some areas, we might not have certain permit requirements just for local zoning. I see, Tim, you have your hand raised. Tim Opitz with Renew Missouri. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. This is Tim. I just wanted to, I guess, thank Paula for her comments on the LEO. And I just wanted to kind of add in that, I appreciate the staff. I don't think in the version that you filed, but when you do go back to look at it, I think our recommendation would be that you do have, I guess, some form of criteria in there. I know I've spoken with certain developers who've said that, they weren't really happy with the FERC order this summer. But one of the, I guess, better actions that came from it was the language, I guess, more clearly defining or giving the state the opportunity to more clearly define when the LEO begins. And that was seen as sort of correcting problems from a Fifth Circuit court opinion. So I would encourage the new rule to incorporate, some of the details. I know Paula listed a few of them, but just so that the QF developers have some certainty when they look at the rule.
So to follow up on that, are you suggesting a list, but maybe that it not be all inclusive?
My understanding, and perhaps I was misunderstanding what Paula or Ms. Johnson's comments were. It sounded like that's what she was advocating for, was a list that would leave it open. To the extent that there is an opportunity for leaving it open, my concern would be I don't want a rule that allows the utility or the incumbent utility to unilaterally cancel something. I would want the language to allow the QF to put forward maybe something that's not specifically itemized proof of their meaningful step to obtain site control other than what was in the list. But I wouldn't want it to be that you could go forward and use that catch-all language to exclude or require any number of additional things, right?
Okay, thank you. And did you had the second question was what types of approvals and permits may reasonably be required? Did you have anything to add specific types of approvals and permits that you would expect to be required throughout the state or in certain areas that we could consider? And I will note, Paula and Tim, you both have your hand raised still. So when you are done and not have anything to add, go ahead and put your hand down.
Sorry about that. Yeah, just to follow up on your question, one of the states that I looked at that I guess I thought could help guide us was Minnesota, and I think they've looked at executed land lease or wind easements. They've looked at just necessary approvals or permits from government entities, wind study results. I think they've looked at receipts for reserved equipment. And I guess one other thing and I'm not exactly certain on the details, but complaints that were filed with the Public Service Commission. I guess in that case, they were looking at potentially using that to establish the LEO.
Okay, thank you. Paula, did you have something to add? Looks like not.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute.
Oh, okay.
I do have something to add. I appreciate that. Thank you. I did note that there might be, because I know one thing that the other folks are looking for is some certainty, but I think there's an opportunity for potential certainty on both sides. And I would wonder if it might be an idea to also build in a natural expiration for an LEO. So there's some certainty on when an obligation might expire for lack of movement. I don't know entirely what an appropriate time period would be, but I mean, that way, you know, kind of like some interconnection queue issues that come up from time to time, it would help avoid some of the situations where someone might, you know, have a LEO created and then 3 years down the line, they still haven't completed the development. We might want the opportunity to move on to some others who would qualify for some of the obligations under there, and want to make sure have things for planning purposes and the like. So having a sunset on the LEO that it lasts a certain amount of time might be helpful also.
Yeah, similar to our net metering interconnection applications that expire with, you know, if there's no action within a year, or the system's not completed within a year, I think is your idea then.
That's, yes.
Okay, so does anyone have a suggestion as a timeline to follow up while we're on this topic? Feel free to raise your hand, or if you're a call-in user, speak up. Wade Miller with Ameren.
Yeah, hi, thank you. Yeah, since you referenced the net metering 1 year, QFs can be a very broad range of scale. So it may be that there's not even one date that is, uniform for all types of QFs. Maybe it's 1 year for a small project and 3 years for a very large project. I don't know, just hypothetically, but I'm thinking 1 year is probably not sufficient for a very large scale project.
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Jane Epperson on the phone for Midwest Cogeneration Association, Pat Sharkey. And I would agree with that last comment for cogeneration projects, which are large. It takes 2 to 3 years to get them going in commission. So I'd say either a flexible sunset, depending on the size and application, or a longer one, 3 years being kind of a minimum. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Okay, our next question is, should the commission rule be modified to identify what it considers to be a LEO? Paula?
Thank you. Not to monopolize the conversation, but I do appreciate the opportunity. I mean, I do think that we could even adopt something similar to the FERC rule, because with the criteria beforehand, I think that might feed into it well. But just something that demonstrates commercial viability and financial commitment, and then have the non-exclusive list of criteria, and then the ability to adjust some things on a case-by-case basis, I think would be sufficient for this purpose.
Thank you. Would another utility representative like to speak on this topic? Heard a lot from Ameren today.
Claire, it's Matt from Evergy. I just echo, we would agree with Paul's comments. It makes sense to tie it back to the FERC rule and to list some of the additional but non-exhaustive criteria that we discussed on the last question, which could also maybe include deposits or self-certification at FERC as a QF.
Thank you, Matt.
As examples.
The next question is, if the commission rule is modified to include criteria to determine whether a LEO is established, should this criteria be reviewed at the time the application is filed or at another point?
I guess a question, what other point would be considered?
Was that Paula? Or someone on the call?
No, sorry, this is Jane Epperson on the phone.
Thanks,
if it's
Jane.
not when the application, what was intended by other?
Yeah, I think this is getting to, whether the commission is weighing in on whether a LEO is established, or whether it's part of the, right now most interconnection applications are being reviewed by the host utility, obviously. So I think it's probably getting to how the timing works and whether that needs to be specified. Tim, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I kind of had a question.
Sure.
Was there a portion of the draft rule that included some kind of process, I guess, to account for, when such a filing would be made with the commission, for determining an LEO, if you're going to attach, the certain review of it at that point?
So I believe the existing rule mentions legally enforceable obligations, but no, I don't believe that there was something in the proposed draft along those lines.
So is that, I guess I asked that because if this question is, when the commission rule is modified, I guess under what circumstances would the QF applicant, I guess, would be staff's expectation that the QF applicant has to make a filing saying, we believe we've established an LEO with the Public Service Commission, rather than just communicating directly with the utility?
I think staff's open to suggestions, and whether that would be appropriate or not. I'm not sure if that helps or not. And Paula and Wade, I see both your hands raised too. I don't know if one of you wants to go next.
Yeah, this is Paula. I was wondering, I'm not sure we were entirely clear on what was meant by application, whether that was meant to be a application to the commission for a determination, whether that was meant to be like an interconnection application, or what exactly the context was for sure. But I would caution against tying things too closely to the interconnection application, if that was the intent. But if application was more broad, I mean, I'm not sure. I guess the question is what's meant by application.
And my comment was related that with respect to application, presently there's no formal, qualifying facility application that is, specified in the rule or otherwise. And when we get many interconnection applications that we, and in most cases, the customer just frankly doesn't know whether it will be a QF or selling to market. So I think there's potentially a problem if you try to tie it to the interconnection application, because we have no way of knowing whether they intend to be QF unless something like that is created. But presently, interconnection can just be to sell to market or to sell to a wholesale customer. It doesn't have to be to sell to the utility as a QF.
Tim, did you have more to add, or did you just have your hand raised still from your question earlier?
I just had my hand raised. I mean, to the extent that the staff is going to include a process in the rule, I know that's something Renew Missouri has supported in the past, but we usually think of it in the context of, what the determining the avoided cost if QF or if the QF wants to challenge it, or, just a transparent process. I haven't really thought of it in the context of establishing the LEO. So to the extent that you are going to draft a rule or make modifications to the rule, I would think that, including this sort of review during the time that avoided costs are being determined, that would be a nice place to put it.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. And our next question on this topic is, should the draft rule be modified to clarify that a utility standard contract template should not be construed as a LEO? Paula?
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea, just because that is something I've seen in the past, that a standard contract has been used as the evidence of an LEO. And if, since we're moving in a different direction than that, I think it would be helpful to clarify that in the rule.
Tim, did Renew Missouri or maybe Jane, did either of you have a thoughts on that?
So for me, it kind of comes down to what the rule does to the size of the standard offer contracts. I think, as most people on the call are aware, there's like a presumption with the FERC, and I think Ameren and I think all of our utilities have taken advantage of it, basically saying that if the project is larger than 20 megawatts, then the burden shifts to the QF to show they don't have market access. And so the new rule has lowered that to 5 megawatts for certain QF facilities. So if there is kind of a distinction, so if the rule that the commission comes forward with now requires standard offer contracts up to 5 megawatt, I don't really know that there's a distinction here that needs to be made, because whether there's a LEO or a standard offer contract that's established. If it's the same thing, then I don't really know that we need to address that issue. But it's only when there's a difference that I think we need to start thinking about that.
And I'd like to add to that, this is on the phone, Jane, similar comment that if I think the limit should be 20 megawatts, not 5, because that is kind of the rebuttable presumption with PURPA that the cogeneration facilities below 20 megawatts do not have a discriminatory access to markets. So that underscores the need for the commission to adopt the inclusion up to the 20 megawatts. Thanks.
Paula?
Thank you. I do want to note, though, that especially in light of FERC Order 2222 with regard to aggregation, when part of the issue is market access, and I know we'll be addressing that order more later, but I do think that because that has provided a little bit more leniency as far as ways to access the market, I don't know that that is necessarily as defining as it was before that particular FERC Order 2022 was issued. So I do think we need to remember that there are other market access opportunities now thanks to that aggregation order.
Thank you everyone for your comments on this topic. Are there any last minute items that you think fit here, or are we ready to move to the next topic? All right, our next topic is implications of various methodologies for calculating avoided cost. The FERC rulemaking allows for the locational marginal price, or LMP, established in organized markets to represent the as available avoided cost of energy. In selecting this option, are further language edits needed to clarify fixed capacity rates? Why or why not? And we reference the FERC order. Let's see. Kim, is that you that raised your hand, Kim Burton? Or maybe Burton Crawford? I'm not sure who Burton is.
Yep, it's me.
Okay.
It's Burton Crawford at Evergy. And we think that the language that is in the proposed rule works. It allows for the appropriate treatment of capacity payments where appropriate. So we're kind of good with the way it is.
And by that you mean the draft rule that staff put out, or the existing rule?
Correct. The draft rule. Well, I think the draft rule is pretty similar to the existing requirements. I didn't go back and check it word for word, but
okay, thank you. C.M. Peters is next.
Yes, this is Mark Peters with Ameren. I do think it's worth noting here that MISO does have a centralized capacity market. So to the extent that a capacity component is warranted, I believe we can, at least for us, we can look to the MISO Module E process, both for the amount of the capacity credit and into the the capacity auctions for a price. LMP obviously is just energy, but at least in MISO, we do have a central market which establishes a capacity price that we could look to.
Okay, thank you. And then for those that are not located in MISO, are there any thoughts on something to look to? Burton Crawford.
Yeah, this is Burton again. Yeah, it is definitely more challenging on the SPP side because there isn't that market to point to, and you know, at this point, kind of the way things are structured, if it needed to be included, I think we would propose pointing to the MISO market as just a proxy value for the capacity.
Thank you. And anyone else want to speak on this topic? Tim Opitz with Renew Missouri.
Hi. So I guess for Renew, to the extent that, you know, the proposed rule allows the avoided cost to be, I guess there's kind of a list of ways that it can be developed. I think it's in near the end, you know, proxy unit, IRP-based avoided cost, market-based pricing, or the electric utility may propose other method to reflect avoided cost. Renew Missouri's preference is that we use the IRP-based method to determine avoided costs, and in that way it sort of balances the QFs with the incumbent utilities. But since the rule, I think as exists and proposed, sort of allows this kind of choice, I think we're satisfied with that rule as drafted. Again, it does, we are interested in sort of a process that is transparent and by which people can examine and potentially challenge before the commission how the utility has developed the avoided cost estimates.
Thank you. Anyone else on this question? Right, so the next question is, MISO is listed in FERC's definition of organized markets, but SPP is not. If the commission rule is modified to set as available energy rates, would the rule need to allow both LMP-based and a competitive price, liquid market or combined cycle formula rate? If so, the commission would need to determine that either of those represent the utility's avoided cost of energy. At what time should that determination be made? So that was kind of a two-part question. And I know Burton mentioned possibly using MISO as a proxy. Does anyone have more thoughts on that?
Could you just repeat that? I'm on the phone, and
yes.
Could you repeat it, please?
Sure, absolutely. And just so everyone knows, these questions were filed in the docket. So if it would help, you could bring it up. And I think Natal also shared it on the screen if you're on a video. So the question is, MISO is listed in FERC's definition of organized markets, but SPP is not. If the commission rule is modified to set as available energy rates, would the rule need to allow both LMP-based and a competitive price? And the competitive price in the FERC rulemaking is liquid market or combined cycle formula rate. That's the first part of the question. Did that help, or should I read it again?
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Tim Opitz with Renew Missouri.
Hi, thanks. So I guess in terms of that question, I just want to say, you know, if we're looking at real-time pricing as the way of setting avoided cost, and that will fluctuate rather than be a locked-in price, I'm not sure that that's going to satisfy the requirement that this is supposed to encourage deployment of renewables and cogeneration. because if that's the case, they could just participate directly in MISO or in SPP anyway. So it's not really encouraging it. It's just kind of there. And I do think that PURPA had one of the intents of it was to encourage this kind of development. As a matter of when that should be established, I think we're open to, Renew Missouri is open to, the utilities making their filings as was in the draft rule. And then if there was a process by which that could be viewed by the public and challenged by interested parties, then that's kind of when we think it should be established for avoided costs generally.
Thank you.
Tim, this is Natelle. Just to clarify, are you suggesting that a process be added to the rule, or do you think the rule provides sufficient, that the draft rule provides sufficient process for a challenge?
Hi, so let me pull up that draft rule here. I know when we had these cases, it feels like a lifetime ago, probably only a few months ago. Renew Missouri had proposed language that sort of established a process, and that was somewhere within, I think it's the new section 11, where the utility has to make filings. And I think we may have included it up in section section 4 about standard rates for purchase and standard contracts. So I think from the staff's proposed rule, at least as is filed in EFIS in this current docket, that additional language would be helpful. Whether it's absolutely necessary, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of the view that maybe we could file a complaint or somebody could file a complaint with the commission saying, that these rules are not being followed. But I would think it better to have clarification added into the rule. And I can, after this conference is over, I can either send that to Claire or Unitel, the language that I'd proposed previously.
Okay, that would be helpful. We can also go back and get it, but if you have it handy, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah, and just as a clarification, I think the current draft of the rule references filing procedures that would create a tariff case. So it kind of references back to that. I want to say chapter 2, but I'm probably mistaken. I don't have it in front of me. Okay. So is there anything further on whether any clarification is needed on fixed capacity rates? If there's variable energy rates, does the rule need to clarify anything about fixed capacity rates is kind of the question that we've been talking about. And then also the a little bit detail on how to do that. Let's see.
So
Tim, your hand raised.
my hand is raised, and this time it was intentional. So the other thing that Renew has pushed for is, putting in the rule a term of the contracts, length, I should say, of the contracts. So that's something we'd be interested in. If the avoided costs for, at least for energy prices, are allowed to be variable, I mean, it's going to make it difficult for QF developers to come to the state. So obviously, the longer the contract is better. I think this fall and summer, Renew Missouri had proposed 15 or 10-year contracts. And from people I've spoken with, I think they've said that a 10-year contract would be potentially doable depending on the avoided costs. So I would encourage, to the extent that, we're looking at using variable costs, that there is at least some length where that cost doesn't change immediately.
This is MCA on the phone. I would concur with that. A 10 or even a 20-year is reasonable. Thanks.
And this is Paula. Paula Johnson with Ameren again. I think it's just important to kind of remember that, if we're looking at avoided costs, which are ultimately paid by our customers, then we want to make sure that those avoided costs don't fall out of sync, so that it ends up ultimately costing our customers money in the long run, depending on how things shape out over time. One thing a variable cost would do would provide them some additional protections. And that's assuming that we have to do the longer contract terms. So I think there are multiple things that we need to consider there, and not just how long should the contract terms be, but how can we, if we have to have longer contract terms, how can we best protect our customers? And I do think it's worth kind of repeating that, especially thanks to the, if we're looking actually at like avoided costs, then, and I know in our case, we look at the market cost for that. If those market costs are also going to be available through the aggregation options under FERC 222. So we don't think this is the only option to continue to, kind of push forward renewable development. It's just another option. And we need to make sure we're appropriately weighing that for the protection of the customers who ultimately bear those energy costs.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I just want to, I guess, pipe in once more, and I've talked about this in the comments in the past, but, really those longer term contracts and keeping the fixed energy price for a longer period of time are pretty important for the development. And, it kind of puts these QFs on the same level as the utilities. But the difference being, when the utility builds a plant, they're using, these life term methods. But then they also get to earn a return on it. So I think as a matter of equity and to encourage development of cogeneration and qualified facilities, that, I think they should be treated on sort of the same level as the utility is. And that's just what I would add. I've heard some examples of longer term contracts in certain states showing to the detriment of ratepayers. And, there's some consequences of that. They're looking at those studies that look at natural gas prices as, the price of natural gas when they locked into their contract were quite high. And with the advent of fracking, they went down quite a bit. So that showed that, those contracts weren't necessarily in the money for the ratepayers anyway. But that doesn't mean that since that happened in the past, that will always be the case. It could be very well that, fracking is banned, or, something like that, in which case the contracts, if they're signed when the natural gas prices are low, they would be in the money for ratepayers. So, I think it's kind of a double-edged sword. But I think treating the QFs with the same, for their generation, the same length of time that we treat the utilities generation investments would be equitable and in line with the purposes of the PURPA statute.
Thanks for your comments. And I think this next question will tie for as a follow up to what Tim and Paula were just commenting on. I think both
Comment before. Is there
yeah, this is
before
tying to the comments, but yes, you can go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I thought you were going to the next question.
There's a follow-up question to the discussion, but go ahead.
Okay. MCA on the phone, agree with prior comments for the intent to encourage QF getting into the market. It can be a deal breaker without a long-term kind of contract, 10 years or more. I mean, and equitably treating those qualified facilities as a utility where they look at, lifespan. So agree, it can be a deal breaker. It should be heavily weighted. We really need a longer 10 to 20 year standard contract duration. Thanks.
Thank you. And Paula, I see that your hand is raised, and I was going to ask you and Tim both what type of protection options are needed if there's longer term contracts, and if you have thoughts on the suggestion of longer term contracts. Go ahead.
This is Paula. The one thing I would like to mention, kind of on the immediately prior topic is, I think it's important to note that when they're talking about equity on treating things the same way it would be for a utility, I think there's an important distinction that's kind of been lost a little bit, and that is we build when we're required to for various reasons, whether it's complying with RES standards or meeting certain portfolio requirements or generation requirements or planning for the future. I mean, we have some very distinct needs, whereas the developers are doing it with a very different motivation in mind. So I don't think we can necessarily draw a strict analogy between the two. I mean, there's a reason we do what we do, and it's because we're in this business and are looking out for making sure we're getting service to our customers on required terms. So I don't, while I appreciate them wanting to draw the analogy to what we're doing, we have very distinctly different business models to consider and different means of recovery because of that. So I didn't want that point to get lost in the discussion. As far as protections, I mean, I think part of it, a lot of it would depend on the exact circumstances of the development. I mean, in some cases, it might be the variable pricing so that we can, more closely match it to what avoided costs are, the costs you'd pay, but for purchasing it from that particular development. So I think some variable pricing might help us better do that level of matching for the sake of our customers. So I think that's one thing, but I think, there's going to be some case-by-case analysis depending on some things too, but I think that's one protection that would be important. I'm not sure if some of our other folks at Ameren have anything additional to add on that front.
Wait, I see your hand is raised. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, the only thing I was going to add, and I think it already was mentioned once earlier, is reciprocity can become an issue that where the market is ever changing and new options are developing, new scenarios are developing. A QF, if long-term contracts or longer-term contracts were put in place, they shouldn't be able to leave those contracts for a better market. So that the resource, once it's in the utility, planning sphere, that they know it's going to be there for the term of the contract, that the QF can't leave and go to another market.
Okay, thank you. So I guess a little bit more information from the utilities on this topic. What are your thoughts on having a minimum 10 to 20 year contract, if the avoided cost is variable?
This is Paula. Well, I still think the ultimate flexibility would be to, not set a required contract term. I mean, it would at least, that would help towards making it more bearable, but I don't think it can be the only protection either. Kind of like Wade was alluding to, there are other factors that we need to look into, like, we wouldn't want people to be able to bounce back and forth between FERC 222 and the PURPA purchase because for pricing arbitrage purposes, because that's still going to end up being a detriment to our customers if that happens. I think ultimately the shorter term contracts, so we can maintain the greatest amount of fluidity on pricing, is going to be the easiest way to handle that. But if that's not a possibility, at least a variable pricing would help us protect our customers a little bit more easily.
Thank you. Diana Carter, see your hand's raised.
Thanks, Claire. Yeah, this is Diana with Empire. Would agree there with Paula. The variable pricing would certainly help. It would also make a difference on if the obligation goes both ways in terms of the commitment, like she was saying, if they can bounce around or if it's equal commitment on both sides.
Thank you. And follow-up for Tim Opitz or Jane Epperson. Do you have any information on the impact to investors if there aren't longer term contracts, 10 years or longer? Be interested if you have the information and could provide it.
You bet. I can email that to you or whatever you want.
Okay. And is it something that you could verbalize here today? Briefly, or just if you provide it, that's fine too. Thank you.
Yeah. Hold on a second.
Sure.
Yeah, here there's a quote. FERC and the courts have long found PURPA entitles QFs to long-term fixed-rate contracts. Federal District in Massachusetts found that FERC stated the purpose behind PURPA furthered by allowing QF to establish fixed contract price for its energy and capacity, blah, blah. Fixed contract price provides the investor in a QF with reasonable certainty about the expected return on a potential investment. FERC has consistently affirmed the right of QFs to long-term avoided cost contracts or other legally enforceable obligations with rates determined at the time of the obligation is incurred. And I've got references there that I could forward as well.
Okay. Yeah, that would be helpful if you could forward references, and if you have white papers or anything specific to Missouri in particular, I think we would be really interested in that.
Be happy to.
Jane, if possible, if you could file it in the docket as opposed to sending it via email,
Okay, sure.
And then I have a question for you too. I think it was you that said you've thrown out a couple times 10 to 20 years, and obviously there's a big difference between 10 years and 20 years. So are there any type of qualifiers or anything to determine whether it should be 10 years versus 20 years or somewhere in between?
Yeah, kind of. It's squishy. Again, cogeneration projects are I'm just going to say different than other QFs, right? They're bigger and they have longer planning and project implementation timelines. They have longer lifespan. They're different. So the idea, each one is different. So I'm saying that's what makes it a little bit complicated. Each CHP project can vary in terms of, the need for that contract duration depending on the project. So there's no easy answer, but I would argue for, that cogen is a significant component of QFs, and it needs that. It's a deal breaker to not have that longer term contract. And typical 10 to 20 is kind of the best practices, but that's as far as I can give to you. Does that make sense?
Okay.
Okay, I see Tim Opitz, you have your hand raised. Would you like to go next?
Sure. So I guess I would just add that, when we're looking at contract length, if the commission were to go with variable energy prices, if those are there, that kind of obviates any benefits from a longer term contract, right? So to the extent that, if there's a trade-off between, longer term contracts, but the avoided costs for energy are some variable rate that's changing quite frequently, then you're not going to see the benefit of certainty for these investors. So I really think that, if there is some variable energy contract, the term, which we wouldn't encourage, but I would like to see that term of how frequently it varies be extended to a longer period of time. I would say we think 10 years is appropriate. There's been cases, I think in Idaho, they had it basically every 2 years. Their avoided contracts were sort of a series of mini PERPA contracts because they were updated every 2 years. So we just don't think that's sufficient. And, when we're looking at Missouri, in terms of, QF development, we don't really have very much of it. So I would say, that's, it's kind of not a perfect analogy, but I mean, it's kind of, we can look around and see that our PERPA rules are not actually encouraging QF development.
Hear, hear.
Real quick follow-up, Tim. Now, I understand you guys are not in favor of variable energy pricing, but to the extent that there was a fixed contract length with an avoided capacity cost that was fixed and variable energy rates, would that satisfy some of your concerns, or is that not what you're looking for either?
So that's not exactly what I'm looking for. I think it may have been Burton or maybe not Burton. Somebody mentioned earlier that MISO has sort of a market for capacity, and I don't think SPP does, as far as I know. So I don't know that totally obviates it. If there was going to be some variable energy price, and I'm not saying that this would be a good public policy position, but if it was reviewed every 5 years during the course of a 10-year contract, maybe that's something that would work. It could. I don't know. It would probably be better than what we have right now, but it certainly wouldn't fulfill, I guess, my ideal vision of how these contracts would work.
Okay, and one more quick follow-up for you before I call on someone else. Diana and Paula mentioned protection of obligation going both ways in the contracts. So, what are your thoughts on having protections for both sides?
I think that's fair. I think if the QF developer is wanting some assurance that they're going to be paid a price, that they should be required to sell that energy to that utility and have that capacity available. There may be some QF developers who wouldn't prefer that, but I do think that that would be a reasonable requirement.
Thank you. Burton Crawford, I see your hand's been raised for quite a bit.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the earlier comments that we heard about particularly cogen projects being very unique. And to me, that points out the need for flexibility. So, I would tend to think that we don't really want to lock in a term or a pricing method or methodology that may end up not actually working for anybody. We've had a couple of projects over the last few years that were larger than the 100 kW tariff limit, and we were able to negotiate with those parties and come up with pricing and come up with terms that met those customers' needs. Now, subsequently, both of those projects are no longer in existence. They both had technical problems associated with them. I think one of them maybe even didn't ever sell a single kilowatt hour of energy back to us because of those problems. But we were able to work it out, and I'm not aware of any situation where we've not been able to work it out with parties. And to the extent we can't and we don't, there's provisions in the draft rule to take it before the commission and have them determine. So I would really be hesitant to get into specifics about how these contracts should or should not look because of the unique nature of them. That's it.
And this is Paula, and I completely back that. I agree.
This is from the phone, MCA. Again, with regard to cogeneration being unique, most of the cogen in Missouri is in effect discouraged by the 100 kilowatt existing limit, and even at 5 megawatts, you're excluding the majority of potential CHP projects, which are, economically, they're the large ones. And so by definition, the rule is excluding the possibility for those under 20 megawatts to enter the market. Just want to state the obvious there. Thanks.
And just for clarification, do you mean the lack of a standard rate being offered for systems over 100 kW?
Yes.
Okay. Paula, I saw you raise your hand. Burton, your hand is still raised also. I'm not sure if that was intentional. Paula, would you like to speak up?
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to quickly, because I'm not sure if it's gotten lost in the mix a little bit, but the lowering to 5 megawatt is a FERC matter. So I think if a company applies to that and grants that exemption, I don't think the Missouri Commission could override that. So I just wanted to point that out very quickly.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. And I think there was a comment earlier on also that that all the utilities have that exemption filed with FERC. And my understanding is Ameren has filed for that exemption. I am not sure off the top of my head about Evergy and Empire. So if anyone knows, would like to speak up now, that'd be great. Tim Opitz.
Hi, I don't have an answer to your question, but I do have a question for, I guess, the folks on the call. My understanding was that the reduction from the 20 megawatt to the 5 megawatt at FERC only applied to the renewable aspects of the PURPA QFs, but not the cogeneration, like the items that meet the cogeneration definition. And that one was to remain at 20 megawatts. Is that, am I wrong in that understanding?
No, I believe you are correct that the cogeneration limit is still 20 megawatts, and for other small power producers, it would be 5 megawatts. But if we're both mistaken, I'm sure someone will pipe up. So.
This is Jane on the phone again. The 20 megawatts number reflects, you know, kind of the PURPA demarcation between large and small systems. That's kind of where that comes from. And I think the FERC, again, retain that presumption that anything below 20, you know, does not have that non-discriminatory access to markets. That's just kind of, that's out there. So I don't know if that helps or what.
Yeah, I think the distinction is whether the FERC recent rulemaking has changed that.
Oh, okay. Well, and I guess I was thinking with regard to the standard contracts, if you allow systems up to, would they be in this rule up to 20 megawatts allowed to access any standard contract offer if provided? The question.
You know, I think that is on our list of questions as we go through later.
Okay,
so.
thanks.
Okay, so we do have one last question. Oh, I'm sorry, no, we have a couple questions left on this topic. So staff's initial draft included the following methodologies for determining avoided costs: proxy unit, IRP-based, market-based pricing, and that the electric utility may propose any other method that can be demonstrated to reflect avoided costs. So if the rule remains largely the same as staff's draft, is it necessary to specify 3 methods, or will the utilities tend to choose the same method? So I think that's kind of a question geared toward the utilities. Tim, I see your hand is raised. I don't know if that was in response to the previous discussion.
No, that was, I left it on accident, but I would suspect that utilities would probably want to pursue the same variable energy prices, but Renew Missouri would sort of oppose that. I do like that the current rule and the draft rule include provisions where different, you know, IRP method or a proxy method would be considered.
Thank you. Do we have a response from some of the utilities, Paula? I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, and I can defer to Mark Peters a little bit to get into this in a little more detail if he would like to. He doesn't have to, but I think, you know, looking at the MISO market for pricing has worked with us because we found it to be very representative of what the avoided cost is, because that is the cost our customers would pay, you know, but for. So I believe that's a price we would continue to rely on, and kind of for clarification also, when we are discussing some of the methods to kind of vary price over a term, we would anticipate doing that in line with the MISO costs. And Mark, I didn't know if you wanted to address that anymore, because you are able to state that a lot more artfully than I can. So.
Yes. So this is Mark Peters with Ameren. I guess what I would want to add to that is our current methodology, as Paula pointed out, is based on MISO LNPs. We use a method very similar to what we use in our rate reviews, in that we use a 3-year historical average as a representation. But that's in large part because our rate resets every 2 years. If we were to end up in a situation where we were having to have a standard offer of say 5, 10, or even something as long as 20 years, I don't believe that methodology of using a 3-year historical to represent that entire period would be proper, and we would likely move to a forecasted representation. Now it'd be the same market, the same general concept, but we wouldn't be using a relatively short period of history as a representation the next 5, 10, 20 years.
Burton Crawford.
Yeah, in line with my earlier comments about flexibility, I think it would be fine to list those methodologies in the rule as something that could be considered. But like Ameren, we are using a method that I would consider as a market-based method. As we just have to be looking out on a forecasted basis for 2 years instead of using a recent history. But I like the idea of having that flexibility to consider those other options, particularly if you get into a situation where the term might be longer. That's it.
Thank you. Todd Tarter.
So this is Todd Charter from Liberty Empire. And I just wanted to let you know that we are also using the locational marginal pricing for our avoided energy cost. And we also, like the last speaker, we also use based on a forecasted for the next 2 years.
Thank you for the comments. Paula, do you have your hand raised still, or is that from the last?
That was a holdover. My apologies.
That's quite all right. All right. So on this topic also, if the rule is modified to set variable energy rates and fixed capacity rates, is specifying the avoided cost methodologies necessary, or would it be presumed that it's tied to the LMPs?
Can you repeat that, Claire? Sorry, I stepped away for a second.
No problem. So we've been discussing the methodologies for determining avoided costs and the ones that are listed in the rule. But if we did make modifications to set variable energy rates and while having fixed capacity rates for avoided costs, is specifying the avoided cost methodologies necessary in that instance? Mark Peters.
I think in our case, as long as we're a member of an organized market that, in which we're settling our load, that's pretty much the methodology that exists for us. That is what our avoided cost is. It's a reduction in the amount of load we have to settle in the market.
Wade Miller.
I'm not quite sure I understand the kind of either or nature of the question, in terms of it seems like it would be straightforward to simply add the variable energy rates fixed capacity as an option to the other 3 that were already listed in the previous rule that had been filed and withdrawn, as opposed to replacing them with something. Just set this as an option.
Okay, thank you. Mark Peters, I saw you you raised your hand for a moment, but you.
No, I'm sorry. I thought I had it up and I was trying to clear it, and apparently I raised it again in error. Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. All right, I think covers this topic. As far as our prepared questions, if anyone has last minute comments or questions, now is a good time for that. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next topic. So our next question is regarding the development of standard offer rates. And this question is specific to the joint utility comments, which suggested adding in section 6B1 the words "or as required by the utility" after the phrase "upon request of a qualifying facility." The joint utilities proposal would allow a utility to apply its standby rate, I believe. Does FERC Order 872A allow this? Paula? See that your hand is raised.
Oh, yes, thank you. I just want to clarify, I do think it would allow this. Let me see, I did some research on this, so let me have a quick look at what I wrote up. The rule as it was proposed read additional services to be provided to qualifying facilities. Number one, upon request of a qualifying facility, at which point we recommended adding "or as required by the utility." Each electric utility will provide supplemental power, backup power, maintenance power. So it's kind of in that context. So when you look at 18 CFR 292.305 on rates for electric sales, that just requires that the rates charged not be discriminatory against the QF as compared to other similarly situated customers, boiling it down to a nutshell. So I did try to go through Order 872 and 872A on that specific issue, and granted that several hundred pages. So I will admit there's a possibility I could have missed it, but I did try to do a word search and everything to make sure I didn't. And I think it is broad enough that would be allowed. I don't think that's prohibited by the rules. So I think that would be okay. So.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose, so do you see it as, with the language addition, requiring that the standby rate be applied, or would the QF have the option?
I see it as they could ask for it, they could do a request, or if the type of service they're requesting falls under that and our tariffs, then by our tariffs, it might be required.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. Wade, I see your hand is raised. Wade Miller.
Yeah, I'm going to defer. Never mind.
Okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Tim Opitz.
Hi, so I just have a clarification question, maybe to the utilities, or Claire, you may know. I think there was a rate case a few years ago where Empire, it was agreed that they didn't have a standby rate, but it would be basically they agreed to offer power at whatever rate the person asking for standby service would have normally charged. So I guess what is your view of the difference of that kind of scenario, if that's the case still, and maybe just the standby rates that the utility is requesting, or the joint filings are requesting here?
I'm not sure I recall that specific Empire rate case, so I'm not sure if Diana Carter might might recall something that she could add, but Ameren specifically has a standby rate tariff that is in addition to the qualifying facilities tariff or cogeneration tariff. I'm not sure if maybe Paula or maybe one of the other utilities might want to add in there. And okay, so I see Wade, you have your hand raised.
Yes, thank you. I'm not sure if this directly answers the question, but just a little context. I don't know about the other utilities, but Ameren has a approved standby rate for various types of generation that are not strictly renewable. And so the nature of standby is that you don't know when it's going to occur ahead of time, and it just happens. So how that is defined might be utility specific, between utilities. But the larger point being that to the extent that the retail rates have an approved, just and reasonable standby charge built into them, then it's hard to see how that would not be appropriate. There might be a few cases where, if somebody's purely a solar generator, our standby rate doesn't cover it, regardless of size. So, it's not a universal type of thing, but on the other hand, a solar plus storage, it does apply if it's greater than 100 kW. And, presumably the rate takes that into account and is, like I said, previously approved and considered just and reasonable. So when standby does occur, it's there to be used.
And then just as far as the language goes, I guess would there be any, if it is, or as required by the utility, we might need to clarify that through their tariffs or some other kind of clarification to make it slightly more clear.
Yeah.
I think this is Matt. I think the purpose of the request for the added language is that the QF, it may be appropriate that the utility has an approved standby rate that would be appropriate, but that the QF would not request it. And so that's why we needed the clarification to the rule to say, or as required by the utility, if we have a standby rate in effect that's been approved.
And Matt, that was Matt Doherty, right? With Evergy?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Claire, this is Tim Opitz. I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
When staff was, I guess, drafting this question, was there anything in particular you looked at that made you think that FERC Order 872A would not allow this?
I believe there might have been some language in the FERC order. Unfortunately, I don't know that I have it handy. I'm not sure if maybe someone else on staff could chime in if they have it handy.
This is Kurt Stokes. I can track something down and share it with you. I'm gonna try and look for it now. If not, I can post it in the chat, a link.
Thank you. That would be helpful. Appreciate it. Mm-hmm. I imagine we didn't just come up with it without reading something in the FERC order. So unfortunately, I didn't cite a page number on this one. So, okay. I guess we are ready to move to topic 4, which is whether standard offer contract capacity should be increased to 1 megawatt or 5 megawatts. And this is from the existing 100 kW that's specified in the rule right now. So the first question is directed specifically to Empire. We had to kind of pose the question in one of our previous working dockets about, if there were any technical implications to increasing the standard offer contract size. And Empire did have concerns for systems larger than 1 megawatt. So we're curious if that's no longer a concern because it wasn't mentioned in the joint utility comments. And if not, why or why not? So if someone from Empire, Sam, see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I haven't been on the haven't answered anything today. We are still concerned about the size of a standard offer contract, just from the standpoint of, system capacity, system availability, and what's actually in the standard offer contract. So whenever we start talking about, we're just going to have a standard offer contract out there, we don't have experience. The other part is we don't have a lot of experience with these larger facilities. So anytime start saying that it's going to be in a standard contract, not knowing what's actually in that just causes concerns for us.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful. I think the next kind of sub question is not necessary. So I know we spoke a little bit regarding the term length earlier in the conversations, but we're posing the question, should the rule specify that standard contracts are for terms of 15, 20, or 25 years? And I suppose we can modify it to 10 because I know there was discussions of that earlier. So if anyone wants to speak on contract term length again, this is an opportunity to do so. Tim Opitz with Renew Missouri.
Hi, Claire. Yeah, I know I've kind of talked about this before, but we think that the standard offer contracts offer a big benefit to, I guess, simplifying how the PURPA federal rules and state rules are applied. I mean, if we have for our small power producers, we have a standard offer contract of 5 megawatts, and that's evaluated by the commission, and they've got this standard offer contract, and the utilities all apply for and are approved for the 5 megawatt cap. Then I think that really removes a lot of the administrative burden. So we would be in favor of, at a minimum, moving up to that level there, or at the level that for cogeneration up to the 20 megawatt level, because I think it really does offer benefits of administration. And to the extent that there are concerns about it, and I know Empire has mentioned it, I think that the rule is clear, and the expectation of qualified facilities would be that, they're going to have to pay for any upgrades that are necessary. So if they're looking at it and the upgrades, are infeasible, or they cost too much for them to locate something, I think that problem would resolve itself, because the developer wouldn't want to pay that additional cost. So I would push for a larger standard offer contract as a way of simplifying how the process works in Missouri. Of course, it would, remove some of the negotiation between the utility and the qualifying facility for certain things, but in the cases of these small, I won't say small, smaller facilities, it would really simplify things.
Thanks for your comments. And I think to follow along with that, there was, concern about, and I think Sam Aguirre from Empire mentioned it, with the administrative costs on the utility side. And I think some of the comments from our utilities mentioned the possibility of adding fees for doing these interconnection studies. So I guess what is Renew's thoughts on, having some sort of fee or deposit required to even do the study? I understand your thoughts on increasing the size limit, and they'll, if a study is done and obviously it's not technically feasible from the utility side, causing extra interconnection costs. what are your thoughts about having fees or deposits for the qualifying facility?
Sure. I mean, generally, I think that would be kind of a prohibition to doing it, but it comes down to how the ease of the standard offer contracts. I mean, if you can avoid some of the cost on one end and you're being required to pay for some of these other interconnection costs, that might be something that the QF developers could be okay with. I mean, I'm not developing qualified facilities myself, so I can't necessarily speak directly for somebody like that, but I think that if we're getting larger standard offer contracts that are alleviating some of the administrative burden on one end, then they might have more of an appetite to be willing to pay for or put down a deposit on some of these interconnection studies.
Thank you. Do we have a response from the utilities on this topic? Or anyone else?
This is Matt at Evergy. I guess I'd like to maybe start by just saying, if whether we're talking about a standard offer contract or not, it is our practice that as we have a QF or any other cogen type of customer come to us and want to locate on our system, we would work with that customer. And obviously a customer with 100 kW versus 1 megawatt versus 5 megawatts versus 20 megawatts is going to look completely different, and the type of generation resource has an impact as well. And we would be, our expectation as we work with them is, there'll be a study done on the front end, and if there is an impact to the system, they're going to pay for those system upgrades prior to connecting them with the interconnection. And so that wouldn't be part of the standard offer contract. That would be separate and apart from, I think, what we're discussing here, but that certainly is our practice and expectation. I just wanted to throw that out there.
Paula Johnson.
Thank you. No, I think that, there are a couple of things I want to address. One, I think we shouldn't assume a longer term for the contract right now anyway, because as I mentioned before, I think that makes it difficult to track a true avoided cost for that we need to keep an eye on for the protection of our customers. So I just kind of wanted to mention that real quick. But also, as far as the costs, I think it is important that if we are going to see particularly a pretty big uptick, we need to know that these interconnection study costs are going to be paid by someone other than our customers, and that should be by the folks who are causing the costs. I'd also just kind of like to point out, kind of based on my past experience, I did a lot of work with PURPA in Iowa, and I know it was a few years ago, but the interconnection costs was the point at which a lot of QF and cogen projects fell apart, because once they realized in some of these rural systems, there might be some pretty big system upgrades required. That's when they began to walk away. So I do think that is an important consideration. And I think that's another place where FERC Order 2222 and the aggregators could end up being what another viable option to kind of help to keep things going. It wouldn't necessarily help with the upgrades that might be necessary in some respects, but it might be another way for them to find an area where they can build and get some of the access going. But I do think it's important that the costs be backing up, and I apologize for the little bit of rambling. I had a lot of things I wanted to get out of my head all at once. So my apologies for subjecting you to that. But I think the main thing I want to hit is the people causing the cost of the studies should be the ones paying for it. And the people responsible for the upgrades are the ones that should be paying for it. And from my experience, that is unfortunately where a lot of people decided it wasn't worth their time and effort to keep going. So I think that's just kind of important stuff to bear in mind.
Thank you. That was helpful. I hear someone speaking. Is there, if you can use your hand raise function, that helps. I know call-in users can't, so I'll take a moment here. Burton Crawford, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, I don't think Empire is the only one that's concerned with going up to 5 megawatts. That generally, I think we're okay with going up to 1 megawatt for the standard offer contract, but pointing out that as the larger you go, the more unintended consequences might occur, and the risk of ending up with retail customers subsidizing these operations. And I think it's important to point out the distinction here. We're kind of talking about interconnection issues, which would seem to me are a different issue from the standard offer, going from 1 or up to 5. That whether it's 1, whether it's 5, whatever the level is, we're going to be studying the interconnection requirements, and that is a separate issue in my mind from the kind of the standard offer contract pricing.
Sam McGarrett with Empire, I see your hand is raised.
I think one of the issues you raised was a fee associated through a standard offer contract. And as we talk about, I think everybody would probably recognize that as you look at raising the size of the standard offer contract, the cost to do that study also increases because it has more challenges that it has to deal with. So, whenever we look at, I recognize everybody kind of wants to know what it looks like going in, but to even come up with an estimated cost for the study, that is significantly dependent upon the size of the ask for the interconnection. And I agree that in no way, whenever people come to Liberty and ask for an interconnection, we're going to run through all of those studies, but we also are wanting to make sure that we're not risking some of that cost incorporated in the study and having to be paid for by our ratepayers, our customers. It's actually we get a guarantee of getting that cost covered by the ones asking for the interconnection.
Thank you. And Wade Miller.
Thank you. I apologize if this has already been said either by Ameren or somebody else, but I had to step away for a couple of minutes. Separately from interconnection issues, certainly, interconnection, let's just pick a size, 1 megawatt, is frequently materially different if that 1 megawatt is located on a rural distribution system versus somewhere in the heart of St. Louis. So there are differences. But what I really wanted to mention was that when you go 5 megawatts, so the standard offer contract has a standard price. And the bigger the system, the greater breadth of type of system that might be out there. 5 megawatts could be a couple of windmills. 5 megawatts could be solar. 5 megawatts could be cogen. And they all have dramatically different load profiles. So how do you build and there's maybe some other ways to do it, but let's just say that you were going to have one standard offer price that applied to all standard offer customers. How do you set that price not knowing what type of systems are going to latch onto that price? And if you design it for wind, it's wrong for solar. If you design it for cogen, it's wrong for the other two. So at 1 megawatt, we have no experience with cogen below 1 megawatt. I can't say that it's impossible, but it certainly is infrequent. 1 megawatt wind we've not experienced. 1 megawatt solar for sure. So we could design our rate, around that solar profile, and just recognize that it's going to be wrong for the other types. But if you are getting up to a size where there's lots of potential different profiles, how do you set that standard offer price? Or do you have to have multiple standard offer prices? So to me, the output profile is the real key issue about why not to go to 5. If it's above a megawatt, it ought to be a customized price based upon that specific resource's output profile.
Does anyone have reactions to those comments that they'd like to share at this point?
Yeah, I do. This is Jane from MCA on the phone. The question of cost is separate from the opportunity for quality, QFs to access the market, and whether that should be those only 100 kilowatts or 1 megawatt or 5 megawatt or 20 megawatt. The question is what customers, according to PURPA, should have that access. And I think the answer is 20.
Wade Miller. Wade, did you intend to raise your hand?
Sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, I clicked off my hand and I forgot to unmute. I might have misunderstood the point, but the issue of the standard offer contract is not about PURPA access, which is 20 megawatts, but the standard offer contract, FERC clearly sets the level at 100 kW. States have the ability to set a higher number, but the only requirement of PURPA is a standard price available to all comers 100 kW and below. So yes, many other people have guaranteed access to a PURPA price, but not to the standard offer contract price.
Yeah, I concur with that, but the intent is to encourage access by all QFs.
So Wade, I think part of your suggestion was potentially setting the avoided cost rate based on the type of resource. Does anyone have thoughts on that, or maybe I misunderstood?
This is Wade. I wasn't suggesting that. I was saying that anybody who does not qualify for the standard offer contract, that is what happens, is they get a unique price based upon their specific output profile. And that varies depending upon whether it is behind the meter, and so only a portion of the generation's coming to us, or whether it's a pure generation. And it also varies by the type of generation. If they do not if they do qualify for the standard offer contract price, then currently we have one price. Now, would it be possible to establish multiple prices? It might be, but I'm not sure that that's necessary or helpful. Potentially is unhelpful. So no, I was not suggesting that is a solution that should be enacted. I'm just saying that it might be possible.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful. All right, so the next question is, historically, have standard offer rates diverged from LMPs? If so, generally, how long do the standard offer rates reasonably reflect LMPs before they diverge? And I know we talked a little bit about, you know, Ameren's looking at a 3-year historical period, and the other utilities are looking at a forecast for, I think, the current year and the future 2 years, if I understood that correctly. So does anyone have any information to add to how the, and here it says standard offer rates, you know, we're talking about the existing avoided cost rates and how they compared to LMPs. Burton Crawford?
Yeah, well, we have not done any kind of an exhaustive analysis of this. I did take a quick look at our current rate versus pricing, market pricing for last year. And for Metro and Missouri West, our current tariff rate is 2.4 cents. And for Metro, the market was 2.07, and for Missouri West, it was 2.06. So the market was a bit lower than what our current rate is, which is, you know, about due up for an update.
Thank you. Has anyone else had a chance to look at rates or just have a general idea? Point. Mark Peters?
Yes, this is Mark Peters with Ameren again. I haven't looked specifically at a comparison of the LMPs to the rates, but we've addressed this issue before in testimony and rate reviews. It's as soon as you set it, the ability to have it match is virtually non-existent. You know, the concept is that you want to get a rate that's a reasonable representation. Prices are volatile; they go up, they go down. So, you know, if you're in a period of protracted downward trends in pricing, you set a rate, prices go down, you're going to, you know, your price is going to be too high, and vice versa as well. So I'm not sure that any of us could sit here today and say that, you know, that LMPs have been a great predictor of what rates are going to be in the future, or, you know, that a history is going to match up against, you know, what actually happens. I think there's too many moving parts in the market to try to make that claim.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on how the rates compare to LMPs? Our next question is, what other information should be included in standard contracts? So obviously we've talked a little bit about the term length and you know, if the current draft proposal is that there would be a template developed for standard contracts, are there other information the rule should specify to be included in those? Paula Johnson?
Thank you. I think the main thing that just should be considered is just we still need to maintain some level of flexibility to address situations and combinations of factors that might converge. I mean, I know there's a standard contract is helpful, but not having any power to vary from that contract to address specific situations, I think doesn't end up helping in the long run.
Tim Opitz, Renew Missouri.
Hi, yeah, I'm gonna, I guess I've said this multiple times now, but yeah, I think that the terms in a standard offer contract should be, you know, a larger capacity size. There should be, you know, the avoided cost that they're going to be offered. I do think that they should be a period of years for which they're in effect. And that can, as we mentioned earlier, I think it's probably appropriate to include, I'll call it a bi-directional, as it were, obligation. You know, the utility can't be, or the qualified facility can't be jumping around searching for different rates. And I do think that the you know, interconnection costs should be borne by the QF. So I think those would be the requirements that would be appropriate in a standard offer contract.
Thank you. And then we have one last question in this topic, and that is in specifying the maximum system size to be eligible for a standard offer, is additional clarity needed in regards to measuring capacity, for example, in the case of solar storage systems? Would one of the utilities like to offer thoughts on that question? I can repeat it also if need be.
I would appreciate that.
Okay, so in specifying the maximum system size to be eligible for a standard offer, is additional clarity needed in regards to measuring capacity, for example, in the case of solar storage systems? Wade?
Paula may have more to add on this because I think she did a little looking, but I'm not aware of anything in PURPA that suggests that, or any case law. Of course, I would not be familiar with case law, you know, at its breadth, but I've not heard of anything that says that batteries are QF eligible devices, or storage in general. It focuses on production equipment. So I was a little puzzled by the question. And I know that, you know, there's certainly the era of batteries is coming to us. That much is understood. But I don't know that it's 100% clear. If, for example, if somebody just had a battery and wanted to buy off peak power and sell on peak power at QF rates, I don't believe they would qualify for a QF contract. If they attached a 500 kW solar panel to, let's just say, a 1 megawatt battery, would they then qualify for a QF contract because of the solar? Again, I don't know what case law says, but I think, you know, PURPA in and of itself is silent on the battery issue. So I'm not sure I quite know how to answer the question, but it seems like at a minimum, if there was going to be clarification, it would be that, you know, batteries in and of themselves are not eligible for QF pricing. But there's probably some level of batteries that is incidental to a project where, you know, if you had a large solar with an incidental amount of batteries, that it wouldn't be disqualified. So it may be more of a question of at what point does, you know, a solar plant no longer constitute a solar plant. Those were just my initial thoughts. And again, I'm not sure if I even perfectly understood the question. And maybe my perspective on batteries not qualifying is just flat wrong, but I don't think they do.
Thanks, Wade. Paula Johnson, I see your hand is raised.
Oh, yes, thank you. I think kind of to the first point on specifying the maximum size for a standard offer on how to measure capacity. From that perspective, I think maybe just the accredited level might be sufficient. As far as battery storage, I did write up some info on that kind of in response to question 6, and I can kind of give some of what my perspective is on the battery storage issue on that now, if you like, or I can hold it for a little bit longer if you want to save that discussion for later.
I think we can save that discussion for item 6. That sounds good.
Thank you.
No problem. And I believe this question was raised in response to maybe a news article or something. Curtis Stokes, sorry to put you on the spot, but this is in regards to providing additional clarity on measuring capacity. Did you have thoughts on that you could add?
Yeah, and this relates to a decision that FERC issued a little while ago. I can send a link to this one if anybody's interested as well. But in that one, FERC looked at a capacity of I think it was a combined solar and battery installation, but the inverter for the facility had a capacity that was lower than the combined capacity of the batteries and the solar panels. And they sought certification as a QF based on that smaller inverter capacity, and a divided FERC denied that and said that I think they measured them at the total capacity of both the batteries and the solar cells. And so because there was some dispute over how to measure capacity for those hybrid facilities, I don't know if anybody had any thoughts on that.
Did that help?
Curtis, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Paula, was that you?
Oh, yeah, this is Paula. I was just going to say, I wouldn't mind just having a little more time to try to have a look at that particular order. I've kind of looked at the Idaho information in particular, but I haven't had enough time to go through the FERC order to kind of see how that might join in. But I will say generally that I think deferring to FERC on interpretations of its own orders is helpful.
Hi, this is Tim Opitz. Curtis, do you mind sending along that order? Might be helpful as we move forward in this process.
Yeah, I will. Does everybody have access to the chat in here, so that if I post a link there, or should I do it by email separately?
There are several people that are on the phone, so they wouldn't have access to the chat.
Okay. I think maybe we can do it by email then.
Claire, unless there are other discussions on this particular issue, perhaps this is a good time to take a brief break.
I agree that was going to be my next suggestion. I did realize that I had skipped a question under topic 2, the very last question. Do we want to do that now or after break?
Either way.
Okay. Let's go ahead and do that now, and we'll return after break on topic 5. So the last question under topic 2, which is implications of various methodologies for calculating avoided costs, was, should the utilities calculation of avoided costs be subject to prudence review? If so, how often should the cost be reviewed? Paula?
I know everyone's very shocked that I have an opinion on this one. So, yeah, I think I don't know that a prudence review is necessary in this case, and my reasons are kind of twofold. First off, we file a tariff with these rates involved. So when the tariff is filed, if someone has an issue with it, they can raise it at that point. But there's also a second time for people to raise any issues with the potential rate, and that would be, if a developer doesn't like the published rates and wants to work on that a little bit, then there's the secondary possibility of doing a complaint to try to bring the matter before the commission for decision. So I think there are already a couple of ways that this can be brought to the commission's attention when it's necessary. And, staff, you already have a lot of prudence reviews on your plate between, energy efficiency and some other stuff. I think this is one that if it's necessary for it to bubble up, it has a couple other mechanisms for that bubbling to happen. So I don't think prudence is necessary for this particular one.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess just a follow-up question on your response. In the instance that variable energy prices would be, set based on MISO LMPs, would your statement still stand? I guess that it's. I guess I'm envisioning, would we necessarily have a tariff establishing the rate, or would it be something that would be in reference to MISO, I suppose?
I think, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
No, you're fine. You're good.
Okay. I mean, I think there's still a possibility that if we're, we have a lot of the, we have a published rate, but, stating that this is variable based on something would potentially be something that would also be contained in the tariff. So I think there's that possibility. I also wonder if prudence is necessarily the correct term for what you're looking at, if it's to look and deem whether it's an appropriate rate. I think it's prudence to me kind of is like an EMEA prudence review. After the fact, you're looking through and making sure that the expenditures were done correctly. That kind of thing. This is more kind of, in my mind, it's more of a function of, is it an appropriate rate rather than is it a prudent one? So, but again, that said, I think that there are still a lot of opportunities for an examination and to whether the rate is appropriate or not. And so I don't think that review would be necessary in another context.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Does anyone else want to speak up at this moment regarding prudence review topic? Give just a moment. And I think we can take roughly a 15-minute break if that sounds good to everyone. I think I'm the only one sharing video, so I'm going to mute myself and turn off video. I think you guys can stay connected and just mute your phones, and then we'll return in 15 minutes, which I'm not finding my clock at the moment. So how about...
Can I say something real quick? Because I'm not going to be able to return.
Oh, sure. Who's speaking? Sorry.
Sorry, MCA on the phone.
Okay, go ahead.
Just real quickly, MCA will follow up on with the requested info, the references, kind of for the 10 to 20 year contract term justification. And again, in conclusion, MCA urges the staff to propose the code, revise the rules to be amended to allow nameplate capacities of up to 20 megawatts, and again, to allow that minimum 10-year up to 20-year contract term. So thank you for letting me say that, because I have to jump off after this. It was great talking to you all.
Thank you. Thank you for joining. Appreciate it. Paula, is your hand raised still from the last discussion?
Yep, I will try to be more diligent about that. My apologies.
I appreciate your input. Thank you. Okay, so it's about 3:10 and we're going to take a 15-minute break. So we'll join back in at 3:25. Thank you, everyone. Give everyone a couple minutes. Oh, it looks like Natal started the recording again. So it looks hard to tell if people are back or not, but we can move on to development of technical standards here. We're ready to. Maybe just wait a moment and see if someone speaks up if they're around.
People chime in as to whether you're back or not, since we can't see you.
This is Paula. I'm back.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank you.
He's back.
Tim? Matt, Burton?
This is Burton. I'm back.
Thank you.
Mark Peters.
Great, thank you.
Dana Flusher.
Thank you. So
Right here.
sounds like you can go ahead and get started.
Thanks, I appreciate it. All right, so the next topic is development of technical standards. And let's see. So the current draft rule specifies a 9-month period to develop those technical standards and get approval from the commission. So some of the concerns in the recent docket are regarding the removal of safety standards prior to development of technical standards. So the current rule has several safety standards that are laid out, which I believe are also in all the existing tariffs regarding cogeneration and small power production. So the question we're posing is, do we need to simply clarify that the existing safety standards that are in the current tariffs apply until there is, a commission approved technical standard for each utility? Or or do the utilities feel this, regardless, the safety standards need to be in the rule? That's the question. Right. Paula?
Well, thank you. I think we don't, I think we would like to see the safety standards stay. Just we don't see a good need for deleting them. And I think it's, I think it's helpful to have them established in a rule and not just in a tariff or in an agreement. I think we prefer to see them stay in place.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have thoughts on that? I see a hand
Matt.
raised.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, Matt.
Well, I was just going to say, agree with what Paula had to say. I think our preference would be to just leave it in there, and had a question, just a broader question on, using the term technical standards. If that is intended to, assuming it's intended to reference, the specifics, I think, from previous versions of the proposed rule around the, standard contract and what that might look like if the rule adopts that approach.
So
It's more of a question for staff. I'm assuming that that's what we mean by that.
So I think in the rule, in the current draft, there are two references. So the standard offer contract template is one phrasing, and that's really, the contract piece of it with the standard rate. Whereas the technical and performance standards, I think is what we called it, would be more the safety and interconnection requirements that the utility expects. And my understanding is Empire for sure, and I believe Evergy also have technical standards. It's just not necessarily something that the commission sees and approves.
Right. Yeah. So I guess from Evergy's standpoint, I don't think that we would advocate that that those technical standards that there's language about approving our technical standards, because we've had a long-standing practice of, like you said, having those technical standards that we update, but it's not the commission doesn't technically approve them.
Okay, thank you. Hayden Maples, I saw your hand raised.
Yeah, hi, I'm Hayden Maples. I'm in the distribution standards department with Evergy, and was asking or interested in similar questions, what that process would look like. It's not something we have done with some of our other standard documents, and just due to the speed of changing technology and making sure we get the right information to our customers, we would prefer to avoid a formal commission approval process.
Okay, thank you. And I guess, well, Paula, you have your hand raised. I'll let you chime in if you had something additional.
That was an accident again. I'm sorry. I'm going to put a Post-it note on my computer, so it's better about that.
Okay, and then just as a follow-up, so would there be concern with providing them to the commission per rule and not necessarily having them approved as more of a easy way for the standards to be found and available to customers? Or what are your thoughts on maybe a different kind of process than what's currently in the draft? Maybe more of a providing it to the commission, not necessarily having an approval process. Does that alleviate some of the concerns, or does that not?
Yeah, I think this is Hayden. I don't know if that's directed specifically at me, but I would agree with that process. And ours is a publicly posted document, so we can share a link, and that's always going to be the latest version, or when we make revisions, we can provide it, but just to make sure that we can get the information out to our customers quickly.
Okay, thank you. And any other utilities want to speak on that topic before we move on? Let's see. The next question is on December. Well, I guess before we move on from that topic, are any other comments or questions on the proposal to include technical standards in the rule? So I'm on question 6. On December 17th, 2020, FERC issued a final rule stating that all fuel cells that use waste heat in an integrated fuel reforming process may attain QF status. Are stakeholders aware of Missouri facilities that would qualify as a QF under this broadened definition of thermal energy? Burton Crawford?
Yeah, we're not aware of any of those situations on our system. It's pretty specific.
Thank you. Paula, I think you had some thoughts on this from earlier conversations that I thought it was question 6 that.
Okay. And I misspoke on that. I think I should have said question 7, but in response to question 6 in particular, we haven't had any interconnection requests from the fuel cells. So I can tell you that, but the QF storage was my point, which was question 7. So I misspoke earlier. Sorry about that.
Oh, no, quite all right. I may have remembered incorrectly also. So Tim Opitz with Renew Missouri, do you have any thoughts on this question or anyone else?
I'm not aware of anybody in the state that is seeking that right now. I will continue to look into it though.
Okay, thank you. And I'm not sure if we have anyone from Division of Energy on the line. They might have some thoughts on this question. If so, I haven't heard anyone yet today. So, okay. So question 7 is, should the commission consider separate conditions and terms for QFs that include storage? Paula Johnson?
Yeah, thank you. I had my post-it note and I remembered to put my hand down as soon as I got that. So hopefully I'm going to get better finally. But no, I did do some looking into the Idaho order that was included with the questions that staff put out. And I think arguably QF storage systems don't qualify as QFs. I mean, depending on how much of the source of the power is attributable to the renewable or other fuel source. And the reason I say that is, and I'll get into the Idaho history in a second, but they're not cogen under 18 CFR 292-205. And under 18 CFR 292-204, they don't have the allowed fuel types to qualify for self-certification. If with 75% or more of the power being from that source, depending again on how much of the fuel source is a part of that. I know the Idaho PUC issued an order kind of going a different route with that, but I tried to look into the history of that order a little bit, and it looks like it was based on a state court ruling that, because the facilities had self-certified as QFs, they presumptively were QFs. Which I understand why the state court did that. But I think the issue was this was not something that was raised to FERC directly. Ultimately, only FERC can determine whether something is appropriately a QF. And if someone didn't contest the self-certification, then that issue would not have come up before FERC. So although Idaho has treated them in that manner, I don't know that that's definitive that they qualify as a QF. And I think arguably they don't, and they wouldn't. I don't know that if that particular set of facts went to FERC, that the decision would be the same. So I think if the renewable is not making up 75% or more from that of that particular source, then I don't think I would consider it under that.
Okay, thank you. So do you see a distinction for the 20-year standard contract versus a 2-year standard contract? Those are the two kind of sub questions, or is it really more the percentage that you mentioned?
I think mostly it's I think it's the percentage. I think the Code of Federal Regulations requires a certain amount of the percentage from the background fuel source actually come from the biomass, the waste, renewable, geothermal, or some kind of combination of that in order to properly qualify as a QF. Now, like I said, in Idaho, we have the issue where no one contested their self-certification before FERC. So I don't, until FERC weighs in, I don't know that we'll have a complete issue on that. But I think, so I don't think they qualify in the first place, if that makes sense. So, so I don't know that the 2-year standard contract kind of comes into play completely, depending on what how the fuel source compares to the amount of the storage and as far as output goes.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to weigh in on the question of whether the commission should separate conditions and terms for QFs that include storage? Okay, so I think we're moving on to the final question, which is what impact, if any, do stakeholders anticipate FERC Order 2222 having on the demand for cogeneration agreements by QFs? Paula Johnson?
Oh, thank you. I know I've kind of mentioned this already, but I think, I think FERC Order 2222 provides a lot more opportunities for QFs and they're good opportunities for them to still have the production encouraged. I mean, it's basically an acknowledgement that as technologies and capabilities have progressed, it also, it's another way for them to participate in the market, which ultimately reduces some of the needs for more restrictive PURPA rules. Because at the end of the day, if especially we're looking at being locked into more of the longer term contract, which again, I would suggest that is not necessarily the right way to go. But if we are put into that, but with a variable pricing option so that we're mirroring the market price, which, we believe is market price to us is a fairly good indicator, absent some of the planning concerns that Mark Peter raised with regard to the longer term contracts. But basically, if that's what we're looking at in the construct we're looking at, then there's getting into the aggregation situation is still a very good viable way to continue to encourage that growth without putting some of that potentially on the backs of Missouri customers. So I think with that movement towards aggregation in the market, I think we can let that guide kind of how we approach this rule in particular. I think it can have a definite impact because, the kind of PURPA is not the only method for this type of growth to be encouraged. There are other ways, and there are other ways for people to gather together and continue to spur that growth that kind of create a little bit of a separation between the energy costs that our customers end up paying. So that said, kind of as Wade and some others pointed out earlier, we want to, depending on what we do, we think that they need to choose one method, whether it's aggregation or PURPA, and kind of that particular QF stick with that method so that they don't end up engaging in pricing arbitrage and deciding, well, I'm going to get a more advantageous price by going with the QF contract right now. All right, now the market price is more advantageous, so I'm going to jump and do this one because that creates pricing arbitrage on the backs of the customers, and that we can't allow that to occur. But I do think this is FERC Order 2222, that's a lot of twos, does provide a lot of growth opportunity, and I think it's good to bear that in mind when we're looking at this rule. So, thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone have a response? Tim,
Claire, this is Matt. I don't have anything to add, but would support the comments made by Paula on that issue.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. Tim Opitz, I see your hand is raised.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I myself am still, trying to get a total grasp on what the consequences will be of FERC Order 222. But I guess in terms of the cogeneration workshop, I don't want this, potential future opportunity to be something that is a reason for detracting about why we should make efforts under our cogeneration rules now. That's more of a comment. I guess the question says whether I anticipate it will have an impact. In the short term, I don't anticipate it having much of an impact. I still think things will need to continue to develop. And, in terms of the demand for cogeneration agreements by QFs in Missouri, I think we're at a pretty low level right now, and I'd like to modify our rules so that we do create some additional cogeneration here or small power production.
So I guess just to follow up from Paula's comments, is this is the utility concern something that needs to be clarified in the rule? Or is it, and kind of in line with what Tim Opitz mentioned, is it premature to include something in the rule since some of the, FERC 2222 compliance, I think, is expected this summer from the RTO ISOs, but I could be mistaken about that. Does anyone have thoughts on whether there needs to be a clarification to the draft rule made?
Well, this is Paula. I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Paula.
Yeah, I think if we're getting around to next summer as being when a lot of the aggregation compliance activities are going to be actually making that possible for implementation. I mean, we're right on the cusp of getting there. So, I think it's worth mentioning. I think there's it's worth bringing up that, you know, we need to protect against pricing arbitrage. I do think that's an appropriate clarification for this rule. But I also think we can't, that is so close on the horizon. And it will be shortly on the heels of this rule becoming effective. I don't think we can just disregard the potential benefits that aggregation might provide, and not take that into account in this rulemaking just because they're sequential. I mean, it'll be such a short amount of time before the next one kicks off that I do think it is appropriate to consider the impacts that is going to have on this from both the protecting against pricing arbitrage perspective, and in the PURPA is not the only option for QF's perspective. So I think we can bear both of those in mind as we go forward to figure out just how restrictive this rule needs to be and how we can make sure we're watching the pricing for our customers at the same time.
Thank you.
To Paula's point, and Tim, before you respond, if you have any response, the formal rulemaking process, as some of you know, takes about 6 months. So say a rule was published February 1st, we're looking at August before the formal rulemaking process would be finished. So I just wanted to throw that out as you think about Claire's question.
Thank you, Natal.
Hi, this is Tim.
Yeah, and this is Matt, and I agree that it is relevant to take that into account for this rulemaking, for those reasons that Paula mentioned and what Natal just mentioned, and I was just going to add earlier that, and I think Paula said this, but you know, also thinking about just tying it back to the general statement that we were making earlier about making sure that cogen customer that were to enter into a standard offer contract of some kind would not be able to pick and choose the pricing and do the pricing arbitrage.
Thank you, Matt. Tim Opitz with Renew Missouri. I think you had something to add.
I was just going to say that, you know, I'm not necessarily opposed to the kind of things that they're talking about. You know, of course, I guess it would come down to what the language says, but I think it does. I think I tend to agree with Paul a little bit that, you know, we don't necessarily want that pricing arbitrage going on. So, yeah, I'm open to something like that, I guess, depending on how the language looks.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the comments. So that was the questions we had presented, and a few follow-ups as we talked through them. I did want to pose a question of whether stakeholders are interested in more of an informational session on what the changes are in regards to the FERC rulemaking, and maybe in some comparison of what other states are doing. So if there is interest in is more of a informational type session workshop, you can speak up now, or you could also email someone on staff if you want to think about it a little bit, or any other topics if you think there's more a need for informational session.
Hi, this is Tim. I think I would be interested in an informational session. I guess when staff has sort of thought about some of these comments that the utilities have talked about today, and what the impact it might have on the rule. Just kind of so I understand how the commission staff, which would obviously be a very important party in any of these cases, would plan on, you know, implementing these things if they are incorporated in the rules.
Okay, thank you. So your idea is more of an informational session on our implementation as we move forward, as opposed to maybe the details of the FERC rulemaking, or maybe both. Sorry.
Sorry, I may have misunderstood. I would also be interested in that, but definitely, you know, as we move forward with the PSC rulemaking, or workshop at this point, I should say, you know, I am interested in and I appreciate your the staff's candor in coming out and responding to different questions today, but interested in seeing how, you know, it will work whenever it comes to be.
All right, thank you. Okay, well, that was all we had for today. I appreciate everyone taking the time out of their busy schedule to spend with us today and answering our questions that we posed. It was very helpful for our next steps. As Natelle indicated at the beginning, you know, we're gonna take everyone's comments into consideration and see what changes, if any, need to be made to the draft proposal. Now I'll let anyone who has a last minute thing to add have the opportunity to do so. Otherwise, I think we can wrap up.
Claire, that's what I was going to ask too. Does anybody have any last minute comments that they'd like to share?
I just want to say thanks to everybody. This is Tim Opitz. Thanks to everybody for participating. And, you know, it's always helpful to hear what everybody's perspectives are. And Paula, I appreciate your extensive comments. They're very informative as always. Thanks again.
And thank you so much for the discussion today. It was very helpful and very informative. I appreciate the opportunity.
It was also very well run.
I'm sorry?
Said the discussion was also very well run. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Claire did a good job.
Thanks, everyone. I appreciate everyone taking the time.
Thank you, Claire.
I'd like to thank everyone for your participation today. I think, like Claire said, and some others have said, we've had a good conversation, and staff will be getting together amongst ourselves to discuss what we heard today. So appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.